I want to welcome you to the Pro Mindset Podcast. The Pro Mindset Podcast is all about diving into the headspace that results in championship performance. High-performing athletes, winners, have this mental flow and have a positive headspace for their performances and success. Join me, Craig Domann, sports attorney and NFL agent, on this podcast. I will interview pro athletes, college athletes, football coaches, and sports personalities. Together, we can discover how you can get in the flow and have your own pro mindset. I want to welcome Chris Chester, former NFL offensive lineman, former second rounder from the Baltimore Ravens, to our podcast today. Chris, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's go back to high school. You're from Orange County, Tustin, California. You accepted a scholarship to play for Coach Stoops at Oklahoma as a tight end.
Right.
And then you converted to offensive line in spring ball before your fifth year. Is that correct?
Yep.
So you really played one season of college football on the offensive line.
Yes.
And then you had the opportunity to get drafted in the second round by the Baltimore Ravens and Ozzie Newsome, who's in the Hall of Fame. So share with us what happened on draft day.
So I remember being in our duplex with my wife and my dad and some of my friends, and we made the mistake. We started watching all the pre-draft stuff like way too early. So that's just a long, slow grind. It seems like, especially with a moment, like that in your life. But we did watch it. We got up early, ate a little breakfast, and watched all the gurus talk about who's going where and what team will do what. So that was probably about 8 o'clock in the morning. Probably close to 1 in the afternoon. Finally got the call from Baltimore and said they were interested. And Ozzie called me and asked if I wanted to be a Raven. And of course I said yes, and haven't really looked back.
Okay, so let's go back to when you were a rookie in 2006. Mm-hmm. What was the biggest adjustment to the NFL from college?
I mean, I was obviously new to O-line, hadn't played a whole bunch, kind of like we mentioned before. And that being said, I was coming from being a tight end. I was kind of able in college to kind of get away with some stuff just because I was maybe a little more athletic in times. Once I got to the NFL, that your athleticism gets you so far, but at a certain point, you need to learn the game. You need to become more sound in your techniques. You just need to play a smarter, faster game, physically and mentally. So that was the biggest adjustment for me.
And so you were with Baltimore for 5 years, and because of the lockout and then the rules that affected free agency in 2011, you didn't get to become an unrestricted free agent until after your fifth year. Compared to every single year since 1993, it was 4 years. So you were in the draft class that got caught up into that. So what was your mindset when you had an opportunity to go to the Washington Redskins and you still kind of wanted to stay in Baltimore because your friends were in Baltimore, your loyalty was in Baltimore, but the money was in Washington? Take us through the decision-making process that you had.
An opportunity for an athlete like free agency to make some really sincerely life-changing money it's something you have to consider. And as much as I had my friends and my teammates and kind of knew some of the coaching staff, I knew the coaching staff pretty well in Baltimore. I knew this was just too good of an opportunity to miss. And as much as I missed being around those guys, this was ultimately what was best for my career and for my family.
Absolutely. What was your fondest memory or your best memory in Baltimore?
It's kind of random, but we played one of the last games in the old Cowboy Stadium and ended up winning on 2 back-to-back, like 70-yard runs or something. It was really exciting because, I know that they picked our team to be the last game in that old stadium. So, I'm probably exaggerating, but they kind of call you out as kind of what you tell yourself. So we went in there and were able to win the last game in such a historic stadium, which I thought that was really, really a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Let's go to Washington. You were in Washington for 4 years. You played every play except 3 in Washington. What was your secret to recovery and being able to do this day in and day out?
Well, I think I would go further back to my high school coach, Myron Miller, who kind of really initially taught me how to be a football player. And I'll spare you the X's and O's of high school football, but basically we ran the ball a whole lot. And the whole philosophy was 10-man block so one can run, and it's good for the team, And to me, I really began to value the importance of being accountable and being reliable. It would sincerely kind of, if I couldn't play, I really felt like I was letting the team down. Whether I was right or wrong, it's kind of just how I've always felt. And it's kind of set the tone for how I approached my recovery, my training, is to never, ever let my teammates down. And that's pretty much been the core of why, if there was a chance that I could play, I was going to play.
Well, that's exactly what you did. Your high school coach did a hell of a job, because very few guys today play like you played when you played. I mean, guys take weeks off. Guys have boo-boos and they kind of take the game off type thing. There's a few guys, especially offensive linemen, that are tough son of a guns that'll play all the time, but a lot of guys don't. You'll see a lot of guys don't play 16 games in a season. I'm going to bounce around a little bit. Let's go back to college and pretend like you were an advisor for a young man coming into the NFL this month. The draft's later this month. Knowing what you know now, if you were mentoring a young offensive lineman or a young rookie that's coming into the draft this year, what would you tell him to do to be successful, knowing what you know?
Just keep learning. Just keep reteaching yourself everything you learn throughout OTAs. The mental part is the toughest part. It's hard to really convey to people who don't know how complicated some schemes are and things you got to do at that level. Just the game is played at a really, really high mental level, particularly on offense. There's a lot of moving parts for to be successful. So I would just say, just keep learning. That'd be number one, is just keep learning. Secondly, maybe find a vet you can get around and talk to and be able to maybe kind of role model your own behaviors after. And third, when it's time to get away, find a way to get away, a healthy way to get away. Where you got to go on a drive, you got to read a book, video games, whatever. Find a way to kind of separate yourself when it's time to take a break, because it's also your workload, it seems, increases tenfold once you're in the NFL.
No doubt. I think one of the things that trips up a lot of players when they go in the NFL, even though they may be very talented, maybe they killed it at the combine, maybe they were All-American in college, they get to the NFL and the sophistication trips them up. Because on any given play, you might have 2 plays called from the huddle. You might kill one. The quarterback may have the flexibility to flip it. And so, for some guys, they can only handle one idea. In that particular situation, there was 3.
All the best players I've been around have known the game inside and out. The guys that are Hall of Fame type players, and I've been fortunate to play with some, they knew what was happening before it was happening. They probably had a very good idea what the coordinator was going to call. They knew the game. They knew their keys, whoever they're going against. So I think that's probably maybe my biggest advice. Just keep learning. Be the smartest player you can be.
So let's go back to Baltimore and some of those Hall of Famers you played with. Jonathan Ogden. Did you play with Jonathan?
Yeah, 2 years. My first 2 years. Ray Lewis, Ed Reed, Steve McNair. I don't know if he's in the Hall of Fame, but he should be if he's not.
And there'll probably be a few more coming. Marshall Yonda might end up getting there. You never know.
Absolutely, yeah. Just some great talent.
Let's talk about Ray Lewis, because he's so well known and he's so inspirational, and he's been, his speaking ability is second to none. What separated him from everyone else in the locker room as a football player?
I guess his passion. He talked a big game, but he also played a big game. At least my time around him, I never felt that it was Ray trying to position himself to further his materialistic goals. He didn't want to play well, buy a nice car. He wanted to play well because the game was important to him. And there was a standard on how you approach the game.
I know Jonathan Ogden was just a freak. Blessed with a lot of athleticism. What was the thing about Jonathan that you learned? What was the thing you stole from him?
As far as physically talented and gifted as Jonathan Ogden was, he knew football quite well. I don't know if people quite realize that. Usually, you see him, you think like all he's doing is block in the defensive end all the time, but he knew pressure looks. He knew how to adjust different run schemes. He was a very, very, very smart player. That sometimes gets missed in all of his physical and God-given gifts.
So 2 common denominators there are passion and just, knowing the game, preparing, knowing what's going to happen before it's going to happen. And I think, especially for defensive players, it's critical that they have an idea what's going to happen when the play's called. So who was, with all those big personalities in Baltimore, who was the dude in the locker room?
And probably still Ray. Ray wasn't, obviously I don't think anyone could give those kind of speeches every single day of their live or practice, but Ray still, it was always Ray's team. Baltimore kind of has an identity about it, and I think that Ray is part of the tone set. Ray was part of the reason that Baltimore has the identity that it does.
Absolutely. Baltimore has an identity as a defensive franchise, and Ray Lewis is a huge part of that. Let me ask you this. You're coaching your sons in baseball, football. What are you coaching your sons in?
Football and basketball.
Okay, so do you ever pull a Ray Lewis speech out of your hat for halftime?
No. And that's another thing. That being that kind of person is not for everyone either. I think you kind of got it or you don't have it. And, kids and players, they know they can tell if you're kind of faking it. There's other ways. There's just a million different ways to skin a cat. Ray's way was powerful, but I would say to any athlete, if that's not you, then be yourself. If you're a lead by example type person or player, be a lead by example player. Or if your motivational speech is not screaming, but it's a sincere, heartfelt plea of emotion, then be that kind of player. It's just be who you are, because your teammates in the NFL and I guess probably at any level, any higher level, people can tell if this guy putting on a show or is this guy sincerely passionate about what he's saying.
I agree with you, and I think one of the worst things you can do is not be authentic and then have whatever you were trying to communicate backfire.
Right, exactly.
You were trying to inspire your troops and your teammates, and next thing you know, they're thinking you're fake and they don't really respect you.
Yeah, and then it's trust too. How can I trust this guy if he's not even being himself to be where he needs to be in an important situation?
Gotcha. Okay, let's move on to Atlanta. You spent your last 2 years in Atlanta, and
yes.
You went from Baltimore, that was a defensive-minded franchise, to Washington, that was still trying to figure out their identity. Then you go to Atlanta, and they're an offensive juggernaut. Julio Jones, Matt Ryan, etc. What was it like to play in a high-scoring, exciting offense in Atlanta?
It was fun. It was, for me, for scheme-wise, it was an absolute best fit I've ever had on any team I've been on. We were very clearly going to be a run, play action team, and we were good at it. And then we had some incredible weapons with Matt obviously throwing the ball, and I can name an entire list of Julio Jones, Mohamed Sanu, Justin Hardy, Devontae Freeman. Austin Hooper was a rookie tight end. I think he's going to end up being a pretty good player in this league. Jacob Tamu, another great tight end we had. Just Tevin Coleman. It seemed like any of our skill position guys that got the ball was going to make a huge play. And on top of that, it was an incredible group of kind of young old linemen. I was speaking of Hall of Famers, getting play next to Alex Mack. I mean, just one of the best centers ever to do it. That was really cool. And Andy LeVitri over on the left side, learned a lot from him. Jake Matthews on the other side was a great talent. So I've never been on a team that was just so stacked across the board on offense. With
all three, 11 seasons, who was the most gifted athlete that you played with, regardless of position?
It's probably Julio Jones. There's pretty much throw the ball around him. It's going to be a big play. I feel like he could probably, the right training, he could probably play a couple other positions on the field too, which is kind of scary.
Well, I remember going to one of your games in Atlanta, and Julio's the guy that caught my eye because his catching radius was so large, and he was so smooth of an athlete. I mean, you don't see too many guys that can do what he can do. I mean, he was phenomenal. So,
Incredible. Yeah.
So let's talk about Super Bowl 51, your only Super Bowl appearance. You guys, the Falcons, played Tom Brady and the Patriots. Kind of a bittersweet game for you guys for obvious reasons. Tom Brady's win in overtime against you guys was the biggest comeback in Super Bowl history. You guys started out the game with 21 consecutive points to lead 21-0. Right before half, the Patriots got a field goal to make it 21-3 at half, and I think most people thought the game was probably over. You guys went ahead 28-3 before the Patriots started their comeback. How do you look at that experience? How do you look back on your career when you look at the Super Bowl, and how do you put a positive spin on that experience?
It was frustrating. We didn't do what we needed. We didn't finish the game, and that's, you have to play 4 quarters, and we just didn't finish. We didn't execute. We had our chances to kind of put it away at times, I felt like. And, it was frustrating. It was definitely terribly frustrating. But I can sincerely walk away from that game. And I think I could probably say the same for most of the other guys on our team, that I don't really know that there's a whole lot that I could have done different. So that's a big reason. I'm able to move on, I think, in part because I don't know what I would really change. Obviously, no one ever plays a perfect game. I'm not saying that I played a perfect game, but realistically, I don't know that there's a whole lot more I could have done different. And then, like I said, I can say that for pretty much most of the team. We just caught some bad breaks, and they made their plays, and this just got away from us. But same reason. I tell my kids it's just a game, and if it was a kind of a gut check. It's like, if I can tell my kids that, I kind of have to live it myself, and that's what I've been able to do.
No, that's awesome. I mean, just like last night, I don't know if you watched the national championship basketball game.
Oh, yeah.
Goes to overtime. Somebody's got to lose. And either one of those teams could have won. I was pulling for Tech, and it was like they hadn't won at one point, and then they ended up losing the game by a large margin because of free throws and fouls and whatnot. But I think anytime you get into those championship game type scenarios, somebody's got to lose, and all you can do is all you can do.
And that's the thing. Just you need to play the game in such a way that you don't have any regrets. And that was something I took a lot of pride in.
Now let's look at your whole career. 11 years. You started over 150 games, which is a huge milestone. Anybody that starts over 100 games anybody gets in the Century Club is big, okay? So in starting over 150 games, and you got 3 wonderful children, and you're going to have grandkids down the road, when you're sitting in your rocking chair and one of your grandchildren says, "Grandpa, what was it like to play in the NFL?" And maybe it's a little boy that aspires to play in the NFL at that point. What are you going to remember? You're going to remember the relationships. You're going to remember the competition. You're going to remember going to the Super Bowl. You're going to remember your friends. What? Tell us what you would remember.
The first thing that comes to mind is got to be our relationships. That extends outside of football. I think most people can relate to when you look back on what was really important. I hope that most people can say it was the relationships that I built with my peers and my family and my coworkers. And those are, maybe it's a little bit different in football because the goal is quite clear. It should be quite clear for everyone. If you work at some IT company, it's kind of like there's a million different goals, right?
Right.
In football, it's pretty simple. So we win the Super Bowl, win this game, win this drive. What you're trying to achieve is very clear, and everyone understands that. And you kind of go through some things together, and so those relationships those bonds are very strong. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. Secondly, I'd have to say just competing and preparing is also very hard to duplicate. Well, and I'm 3 years out, but it's hard to kind of duplicate that same kind of intensity and kind of a more kind of in a normal life. It's hard to recapture that.
I think that's what a lot of guys miss when they get out is the competition, the adrenaline, how important what you're trying to accomplish is because there's so many people watching in the stadium as well as on TV. And there's consequences to your success or failure because every day, every Wednesday when you come into the stadium to go to work, there's another guy that just got cut. What is that like? Do you guys just get numb to it? Or is it something where it's like if it's a guy who's got a locker next to you, it really hits you?
I was very fortunate that I had a little bit of security. Maybe that's not the best way to put it, but I had a very stable situation. So I don't know that after about my third year, I kind of knew like things would have to go real bad for me to be on the chopping block, right? I could only imagine that guys who are kind of, free agent guys, they're bubble guys, or they're trying to just get on. I think it probably hurts, but they understand the nature of the business. And, it does kind of suck to see someone like you've built a little bit of a relationship with, and you're starting to get to know, and then they get released maybe 2 weeks later. You feel bad for them. But like I said, everyone knows it's just the nature of the beast. We're all kind of like independent contractors, and we could be let go at any moment. And it is what it is. As cliche as that is, everyone kind of knows what they signed up for.
Absolutely. Let's shift over to, you were married your whole career. You're still married, and there's a impact that the NFL career makes on a wife. So tell us from Kirby's perspective, if I was asking Kirby, what was the most fun thing for her being a wife of an NFL player?
So the first thing that kind of comes to mind is, I think Kirby would say probably the best part is the relationships we've built. The NFL experience is it's very unique, very nuanced. And like I said earlier, it's very hard to duplicate in any other line of employment, I would venture to say. So I think that was probably her favorite part. And then obviously I think the hardest part was just she was by herself quite a bit. And like when I'm working there's no sick days. You need to, if you're on, you're on. So I was always going to be at work. And it was very, very set that she was going to spend, time by herself. And she's a trooper for doing that. And, it was tough, but I also understand, she appreciated that this was just where we're at right now in our life. And I wouldn't enjoy the success I have right now if it wasn't for her being that stabilizing force at home.
I agree with that. Kirby's an awesome young lady, and she knew what she was signing up for too. And she did a heck of a job taking the pressure off you during training camp when you were pretty much 24/7 doing football. And then I think Kirby's also one of those ladies that understood that, hey, I got to be the mom and the dad sometimes during the season, especially when you were on the road for away games.
Yep.
But I also think that you guys had a good mojo together because during the off season, you guys got an opportunity to get reconnected. You got an opportunity to be super dad during the off seasons. And now you have an opportunity full time to be a super dad. What do you think you're a very unique person, okay? You're very intelligent. You've got life after football. You've got loyalty and a sound family unit. Unfortunately, that's not the case for a lot of NFL players. You also played for more than a decade, which the average career length is like less than 3 years. Even though there's few guys, there's 8 to 10 guys on every team that's probably played around 8 to 10 years, maybe a little bit more, some of the quarterbacks and kickers. But what do you attribute your secret sauce to for your success? What made you tick? Was it your belief in yourself? Was it your passion? Was it, your what was your why? Was it financial security for your family?
I was fortunate enough to, one, have a lot of really good influences coming up as a child, as a young man, as a young adult. So I attribute a lot of my success to that. I had a inherently good framework and people who taught me how to do things the right way. So I'm grateful for that. And I think that finding work-life balance was very important to me because I wanted to be able to function after football too, and I knew how important it was. Obviously, it paid the bills, bought my house and all this stuff. But work-life balance is probably the most important thing. I was in, and I was able to be out when I was trying to be out. I think that was the key to my ability to kind of have such a long run.
From my perspective, I agree with you. And I would say that a lot of guys that act like 40-year-olds when they're 25 have an opportunity to play longer because you want to work your butt off when you're at work and then you want to be home when you're home. And you don't want to be thinking about work when you're off. Right? I think a lot of guys in their 20s, they're all or nothing. Okay? When they're playing in the NFL, they get all consumed by it and they burn out. Where the guys that have families and marriages and other interests outside of football, they can keep that balance.
Yeah, and I was fortunate. I at the time didn't realize it, but I had a 1-year-old going into my first year of the NFL, so I like to think I would make good decisions, but I was kind of forced to have to be. I was forced to be off when it was time to be off. There's anyone who's got kids knows when they're on, they're on. Then when they're on, there's no messing around. They need you. You're not going to be able to sneak away and get caught up thinking about football or watching film or whatever. When they need you, they definitely need you. There's no gray about it.
Absolutely. Let's go to Boomer Sooner land. Holy smokes. 2 Heisman Trophy winners the last 2 years. Lincoln Riley's kind of taken the reins from Coach Stoops and just run with this thing with a couple playoff appearances. What's going on in Norman, Oklahoma?
They're hitting their sweet spot right now. And great deal of credit to Coach Stoops of creating an environment, this identity of just high level of football. I can tell you right now, from top to bottom, I haven't met every single new person on that staff, but I can guarantee that they hold themselves to a high standard. I feel confident saying that. So it's a good time to be a Sooner.
It's a great time to be a Sooner. Well, hey, Chris, that's a wrap. I want to thank you very much for being on this morning. Have an awesome day. Give your lovely wife a hug for me. And hopefully we'll have you on again sometime.
All right. Sounds great. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Pro Mindset. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. 5 stars, of course. You can follow us on our website, ProMindsetPodcast.com, or on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Pro Mindset Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you the next time.